Hello everybody, and welcome to the Dwarf Fortress Iceberg. This is an iceberg created by Bay12 Games forum user Moog, and we'll be deep diving a lot of the more obscure elements surrounding Dwarf Fortress, things like community memes, strange mechanics, and general historical events that have occurred regarding Dwarf Fortress in its lifespan. Dwarf Fortress is a game created by Bay12 Games, developed by the two brothers, Tarn Adams and Zach Adams, also known as the Toady 1 and 3-Toe. It is a split colony simulation game slash solo adventurer roguelike. It's known for having extremely detailed mechanics overall, combat simulated down to the pinky finger. That's one of the main points that it's known for. A lot of the things on this list will require, a basic understanding of Dwarf Fortress. The game is free, and while barrier of entry is a little high, it can be a little confusing. I would definitely recommend going to check it out. I've been playing it since like 2012. It's gotta be one of my favorite pieces of media of all time. I'm recording this just after the release of the Steam version, so I will have footage of that up on screen. Dwarf Fortress isn't especially interesting to watch visually, so I'll try to have some more visual elements on screen regarding the topics I discuss, but I think this one's going to largely be a listen along type iceberg video. I think that about does it. I'm going to take this beard off because it is way too goddamn itchy, and I will see you all in the first tier. Boat murdered. So a preface to this entry is the discussion of the traditional style of Let's Play and how it relates to Dwarf Fortress. Long ago, the Let's Play as we know it today was completely different, and instead of a YouTube video with funny voiceover, it was instead tremendously long forum posts comprised of screenshots and paragraphs describing the events that took place. This form of Let's Playing hasn't totally died off, however, and still appears occasionally, specifically on sites such as lparchive.org. Dwarf Fortress itself is uniquely suited towards this text-based style of Let's Play, as visually it's not nearly as engaging to spectate as other games, and the gameplay itself is rather slow, like most simulation and strategy games. Commonly, Let's Plays of Dwarf Fortress are a multi-user affair, with each player having a set amount of time to play and mold the fortress to their whim, before sending the save off to the next person and repeating the process, known as a succession game, which is not limited to just Dwarf Fortress, however. This is the case with Boat Murdered, possibly one of the most well-known pieces of extraneous Dwarf Fortress media. Boat Murdered was a Let's Play slash succession game hosted on the Something Awful forum starting on November 10th, 2006 and ending on March 6th, 2007. I don't want to get into too much detail regarding what actually occurs during the game because it is an absolute experience that anyone with even a passing interest in Dwarf Fortress should check out for themselves, and there are multiple ways to do that, such as the original compilation on LP Archive and the audio reading by Dr. Professor Robot, which I'll link both in the description. One thing to note about Boat Murdered is due to the creation being over 15 years ago, this version of Dwarf Fortress they're playing is extremely different from what you might be used to seeing, specifically having no Z levels and just expanding west deep into the mountain. If you want more information about this or generally about older versions, Archbishop Wex did an excellent video about the evolution of Dwarf Fortress that will also be in the description. Kakame Awamedinade. I'll be honest with you, I'm just gonna give this one my best attempt. Kakame Awamedinade, also known by his title, The Immortal Onslaught, just so much easier to say, is an elf who rose to the title of Dwarven King in a save file made by Bay12 user Holy Mittens. Originally, Mittens was despondent, seeing a horrible elf ruling his population of dwarves, as were other posters on the Bay12 forums. However, after years and years of increasingly impressive feats, Kakame became an honored and revered figure in the Dwarf Fortress community, with countless pieces of art, mods, and discussions centering around him. Similarly to Boat Murder, this entry has been canonized into the community, and most people will recognize the story when you mention the Elf King of the Dwarves. Also similarly to Boat Murdered, I don't want to get into this in too much detail here, as reading through the tales yourself is a must-do for anyone interested in Dwarf Fortress. Cat alcohol poisoning. This is the first in many entries surrounding weird gameplay quirks of Dwarf Fortress that have canonized themselves into the community. This entry refers specifically to the interaction between taverns and the grooming behaviors of cats. When patrons in a fortress's tavern get a little too unruly, they are liable to spill their drinks around, and traditionally this isn't an issue, with the sole exception of how this affects the fortress's population of cats. Due to cats cleaning themselves, as they do in real life, they consume the alcohol tracked onto their feet, but due to a quirk with how drinking is handled, the cat was effectively consuming an entire adult creature-sized drink, which would promptly end their existence via alcohol poisoning. This eventually was fixed when code regarding drinking quantities and liquid foot tracking was cleaned up, and while cats now have the ability to become slightly inebriated from this, they will no longer cease living en masse when exploring a tavern. Hardcore carp. Carp are one of the oldest community antagonists in Dwarf Fortress's history. Prior to the 2014 update, carp, whilst normally being about the size of a standard dwarf and aggressively athletic in the water, also had teeth that were said to inflict 3 times the injury of a dwarf's bare hand attacks, and were absolutely hostile to anything that came close to them. If they didn't fatally wound or outright end the dwarves they encountered, they would pull them into the water, leading to their demise. Carp nowadays are about as threatening as they are in real life, but their symbol still strikes fear into the hearts of many this day. Reading this out loud again also does remind me of another community antagonist in Dwarf Fortress's history, being the giant sponge. While not as seriously threatening as carp, they did have the ability to push as effectively their only ability to do anything, just a generic force forward. At one point, this was liable to just cause dwarves to explode. Giant sponges being about 200 times the size of a regular sponge made them a little too powerful. This was also the update that introduced necromancy, which caused sponges to functionally become immortal, because as you would hack off pieces of them, they would just return. I thought that was also interesting and in the same vein as carp were. Danger room. A danger room is, or I should say was, a construction used for training militia at an extremely fast rate, usually comprised of upright wooden spikes set to repeatedly activate and deactivate through one of many methods. It is the goal of the dwarf training in the danger room to avoid the spears and shoot their dodging, weapon, and armor skills through the roof in a very short time. Injury in danger rooms is common, and they are usually recommended to be built next to a hospital for easy management of the wounded. This will also allow your doctors to gain experience very quickly and prevent them from rusting when they are really needed. They were an extremely high risk, high reward system for making effective soldiers, and obviously high risk meaning high fun. The name Danger Room comes from the X-Men comics, where the Mutant Academy had a similar style training room with the same name used for similar purposes, however with more lasers and less wooden sticks. In the current patch, Danger Rooms have become significantly more dangerous than they were in the past and are largely not recommended for use as opposed to simple group sparring. However, they can be effective if you are willing to potentially sacrifice many dwarves. Keas. Keas are small birds that populate many regions in a Dwarf Fortress world. They are primarily known for being absolute terrors on your fortress's supplies and food stocks, as they're extremely liable to just stroll on in and pilfer whatever they might please, from highly valuable jewelry to the last of your plump helmet spawn. The only thing worse than seeing Keas in your embark location is seeing a group of Kea men, with all the same kleptomaniacal habits, while also being about 10 times the size, and while being weaker than the dwarves, still capable of effective combat. Similarly, the only thing worse than a Kea man is the giant Kea, which is about 200 times the size of a regular Kea and will not only steal from your fortress, but brutalize your dwarves with ease. Also, for years, a decade at this point, I thought it was Kia, and I just looked up the pronunciation before recording this, and I've been completely wrong my whole life, so you learn every day. Mermaid bones. Mermaid bones are the first entry that we see to touch on the truly twisted nature of some of the Dwarf Fortress community. In older patches, the bones of mermaids were extremely valuable, whether made into jewelry or just sold outright. This made sense as mermaids are considered to be rare, almost cryptid-like creatures, and even in-game were only available in specific embark locations. The problem with this came from the money generators that people would create. This involved chaining 2 adult mermaids into a room together filled with water flowing down into a secondary room with a grate for drainage. The mermaids would create offspring, as do any 2 creatures within a certain distance from each other, which would then flow into the drowning chamber and proceed to suffocate. The dwarves would then harvest this mermaid child for its bones, and the cycle would continue indefinitely. This is especially noticeable for being so reprehensible that it made even Tarn Adams himself disgusted and promptly cratered the price of mermaid bones in-game to prevent this practice from continuing in later patches. Elven cannibalism. I wrote a script for this, but it's kind of clunky, so I'm just going to talk about it for a bit. Elves have a very interesting philosophy on sapient life. It's pretty commonly known that in Dwarf Fortress, elves believe that trees are the only truly sapient beings, old and wise and revered and everything like that. And as such, elves will be incredibly pissed off if you chop down trees or make things out of wood. On the other hand, however, elves have absolutely no qualms about interacting in a certain way with life that we would understand as sapient. Elves are known to just start devouring corpses of beings that they really shouldn't be, like directly on the battlefield, and that extends also out to other elves. Elves also have some other weird ethics too that's really interesting to read about. Lying to them is also considered an offense punishable by exile. Also, minor fun fact, they consider tower caps as trees, which are giant mushrooms that grow underground that you can harvest as wood. So if you try to trade anything to them made from even that, they'll either pack up and leave or declare war on you. But yeah, there are many, many reasons why we all universally just hate the elves. Unfortunate accidents. One universal truth all Dwarf Fortress players know is that nobles are not only completely useless but actively detrimental to your fort in most cases. It is little mystery, then, why many nobles seem to be exposed to some unfortunate accidents from time to time, especially when they get a little too demanding. Unfortunate accidents may include levers in their bedchambers, piping in some toasty warm lava, throne rooms built perilously over a massive pit, an up-close encounter with some of the local wildlife, or even a diplomatic meeting with a group of attacking goblins gone wrong. There's a whole list of these on the Dwarf Fortress wiki that I'll link to in the description if you want some ideas on how to maybe prevent some unfortunate accidents. The first anvil. The anvil in-game is quite a paradoxical item. It's an extremely important piece of smithing equipment used in some way or another to create nearly every metal object in the game, including anvils. If you did not bring an anvil with you on Embark, you'll have to hope to trade for one, or else metal goods will be completely off limits to your fortress. In a chicken or the egg type riddle, it begs the question, however, where did anvils come from? If one needs an anvil to create an anvil, then how did the first anvil come into existence? There are many theories put forth, such as the first anvil being made out of stone, bone, or possibly even wood during a strange mood, or it being a gift directly from Armagh itself. Dwarven cheese. Another similar extrapolation of logic. In-game, each type of cheese is differentiated by the animal in which was milked to create it, i.e. cow cheese, goat cheese, yak cheese, etc. This entry stems from one user on the Bay 12 forums, pointing out their concern with the existence of dwarven cheese. Putting that mental image out of our minds for a second, the actual origin of dwarven cheese is the secretions of the purring maggot, a creature found deep within caverns which provides dwarven milk. I suppose that does sound more appetizing than purring maggot milk, but not by a lot. No, that's disgusting. This one refers to a message seen in adventure mode when attempting to do something that your adventurer finds especially reprehensible. Specifically, it seems this message is most easily triggered when you attempt to make the adventurer eat vomit, albeit they will do it if they're starving. There's some discussion about this kind of thing leading to a more fleshed out form of adventurer morality, where you won't be able to force an adventurer to do the things they disagree with without altering their ethics first. And that whole concept is going to tie together with some of the future entries on this iceberg. Dwarven rain phobia. One of the easiest ways to give a dwarf a negative thought is to have them get caught outside in the rain. This is a universal dislike across all dwarves for one reason or another, leading to the theory that a phobia of rain is ingrained in every dwarf from birth. Specifically in one update, it appears that the negative thought for rain is significantly stronger, leading to dwarves believing working in the rain constitutes self-sacrifice, and some being driven entirely to rage. I forgot to add this into the script, but I did read a quote from somebody that apparently does work in mining and cave-based activities, that when you spend so much time working with chipping away stone underground, that sort of dwarven behavior, you do get covered in a layer of rock dust and garbage that you pick up down there, and the rain becomes immediately just detrimental to your entire being. As you get rained upon, all of that crap covering you drips into your eyes, into your mouth, everything like that, and rock dust in your eyes is apparently one of the worst things that can happen to you. So taking that into consideration makes a lot of sense why dwarves just absolutely hate the rain. Dwarves ending their own lives. Alright, YouTube isn't gonna like this one, so I gotta dance around it a little, and a lot of the later entries I do too, so fair warning. Dwarves can be known to end themselves in certain situations, although it is quite rare. The primary reason for this is usually insanity, possibly from an incomplete strange mood, becoming melancholic, or catatonic, or by being trapped in a location. Sometimes dwarves can be seen performing absolutely harebrained actions that result in them being taken off the mortal coil, such as carrying a rock through rushing water, which may look intentional, but is mostly just good old-fashioned dwarven stupidity. Ice oceans are hostile. I had a little difficulty finding information about this one, but here's what I think I figured out. Normally embarking on an ocean biome is impossible, as there isn't any actual land for your dwarves to start out on, and the game won't even let you choose that location. However, using DF Hack, you are able to embark onto an Arctic ocean due to sheets of ice appearing and may support your dwarves long enough to begin their work. The game itself possibly considers these Arctic ocean biomes to be hostile civilizations, which is usually reserved for things such as goblin towers to prevent players from embarking normally in these locations. But like I said, I just found very little about this one. People apparently do this as a challenge. It just sounds miserable. Angels. Angels are creatures created during World Gen to guard demonic vaults. They are assigned a specific sphere belonging to whatever god created them, which determines their usually horrifying appearance. They are insanely strong with immunities to practically everything and break down buildings with little issue, as well as usually being accompanied with soldiers and minions of only slightly reduced strength to them. One interesting note is that if your fortress manages to successfully take over a vault during a raid, it'll unlock that specific form of angel as a selectable race in adventure mode for that world once you retire your fortress. Slaves to Armagh Chapter 1. Known to most people in the Dwarf Fortress community, the original title of Dwarf Fortress is Slaves to Armagh, God of Blood, Chapter 2, Dwarf Fortress. Many people then ask, logically, what's Chapter 1? Hidden away on the Bay 12 Games website is the page for Slaves to Armagh, God of Blood, the precursor game to Dwarf Fortress. An attempt at making a procedurally generated roguelike with full 3D graphics and an exceedingly detailed world and engine, the original Slaves to Armagh proved to be fairly difficult to develop or requiring 3D modeling work for every addition they might want to add. They then began to work on a smaller side project using simple ASCII graphics to reduce development time, which eventually became what we all know as Dwarf Fortress. Eventually in 2006, Slaves to Armagh, God of Blood was fully shelved forever and work was shifted fully to its successor. However, Dwarf Fortress's adventure mode seems to carry on much of what they were trying to accomplish with Chapter 1. Helpless or hopeless? This is a small Easter egg found in the help screen that has been there since the oldest documented releases of Dwarf Fortress. On the game's title, navigating to the help screen gives you a small guide on how to play. Pressing the help button again takes you to a help document about text viewers, teaching you somewhat sarcastically how to navigate links. Pressing help again brings you to a screen called text viewers again, telling you to go back. It does not know how to explain this any clearer. Pressing the help button one final time leads to a screen titled Helpless or Hopeless with the message, "You have pressed the help key many times. You only need to press the help key once, no matter how urgent your problem may seem at the time. Press escape to go back to the previous screen. Despite my promise to have the help key work on any screen, it doesn't work on this screen." Immortal Catatonia. I'm not totally sure if this is referring to a specific event that occurred or just the concept of this, but broadly what I think this is referring to is the combination of a creature both being immortal and being stricken with catatonia, the illness that causes them to become catatonic or completely unresponsive and lifeless. This leaves whatever creature suffered these two fates as an unmoving lump wherever this initially occurred for seemingly the rest of existence. Quite possibly one of the most horrifying concepts if you linger on that thought a bit too long. Also, something JoJo reference, I guess. Dwarven interbreeding? I don't know how comfortable I was in researching this, and I really hope it didn't put me on a list. From what I can tell, the act of two dwarves with close familial bonds breeding is basically impossible. People have noticed that dwarves several steps removed from each other, like cousins or in some cases aunts and nephews, were observed to create offspring, but direct relationship seems to outright block the ability for any romantic relationships to form. Kobold sieges. Kobolds by default are not flagged to be able to siege a fortress. If a kobold civilization is near your fort, they'll occasionally send off a thief, and if they steal enough from you, they'll send ambush parties to steal even more, but they'll never begin an outright siege on you. That being said, simply editing the raws to give them the flag for sieging will enable this behavior, although it's unclear as to why you would ever want this, as kobold sieges are laughably pathetic, and their ambushes are much, much worse. You hear a low boom. This one is super funny. This refers to a message some players see in adventure mode, usually accompanied by, "You hear a metal chink." Players often speculate if this message comes from a giant creature, perhaps a bronze colossus or a forgotten beast, or even a distant lightning strike. Well, it's none of these, and in fact it's the mating call of the kakapo, or a small bird known as the owl parrot. Adventurer retains consciousness after death. This theory proposes that since you have some fortnight? Jesus. This theory proposes that since you still have some form of, albeit useless, control of the adventurer posthumously, your adventurer retains their consciousness the whole time that they're dead. Typically, attempting to do anything as a dead adventurer will simply just remind you that you're dead, such as checking the time or checking the weather. However, there's an entry coming up that will tie itself into this theory that I think is much, much more interesting. Bearded female dwarves. This is an ongoing debate in not only Dwarf Fortress, but fantasy discussion in general. Dwarves, aside from digging and drinking, are also known for one thing, and that is their glorious beards. The question then is, does this only apply to the males, or does the race as a whole sport these glorious facial locks? Dwarf Fortress kind of answers this, but not definitively. Female dwarves do not have beards by default. However, the code is there for them to grow beards, but just simply comment it out. All it takes is removing a couple characters, and they're back to growing them with the rest of them, the best of them, the beardest of them. The economy. The economy is both a future feature and a removed feature in Dwarf Fortress. It was present in the game prior to version 0.31 and has been removed until further notice, with Todiwan stating that it may return once it gets a complete rework, as the original iteration was extremely broken. When activated, it adds personal wealth to every dwarf in the fortress and makes food and objects require to be purchased by each dwarf. Coins can be minted and used as currency, although the fortress can operate using vaulted coins or even no physical currency at all. Shops can be built to allow dwarves to spend excess wealth, and legendary dwarves have effectively unlimited wealth. The whole system just had way too many problems and was too confusing to try and manage on the whole. Coins still exist in the game, but really only serve the purpose of trading between your own civilization. Also, I brought this up to a friend of mine at work, and they reminded me that at the time the economy existed, people would build just rooms full of pointless levers that you would send your dwarves into to just pull and do nothing, and it would just give them money so that they wouldn't starve to death. And doesn't that just say a lot about society? Necromancer experiments. Experiments are night creatures created by either necromancers or some types of goblins, composed typically of one modified creature. However, failed experiments exist that are usually some kind of blob or worm, as well as an amalgamation that is a large mass of multiple creatures. Some have full intelligence, while others are simply just shambling aggressive monsters. Similar to the angels, despite their varied appearance, they have some of the same traits, such as lack of hunger, breathing, and the ability to destroy buildings. They typically hang out around the site of their creation, although they can wander off to wherever, so you're never truly safe from these things. Wagons are alive. The wagon you bring with you when you first embark has some strange properties. The game, somewhere deep internally, considers these things to be living beings. When the wagon is scuttled and broken down for wood, the game treats it as becoming deceased, or even going missing if no one was there to witness it. This can cause dwarves feelings occasionally, and monuments can be carved to memorialize the dead wagon. A little off topic, but when the wagon is scuttled, it generates a unique type of material called wagon wood, which functions akin to regular types of wood. However, some dwarves may actually have a preference for this. Arm okay. This one's real short. The name of the dwarven god Armok originally comes from the term Arm OK, a console message from an early game by Tarn Adams called Dragonslay. Arm OK refers to the variable that checked to determine how many available arms the character has for inventory purposes. Boogeymen are a manifestation of fear. Boogeymen are procedurally generated night creatures that may attack you at night in adventure mode. They are demonically aligned and usually exist when the spheres of darkness and nightmare. They can transform, duplicate themselves, and will disintegrate into smoke when either killed, exposed to the dawn, or the adventurer escapes them. These traits combined lead to the theory that the boogeymen are physical manifestations of the fear intelligent creatures in the world feel, especially revolving around darkness and the night. All adventurers are asexual. Unlike virtually all creatures in Dwarf Fortress, playing as an adventurer makes you incapable of producing offspring. There are just simply no options for it in adventure mode for romantic discussion or intercourse, leading to the theory that all adventurers are just not interested in copulation. There's not much to say here, but I will mention it's probably for the best that we don't have this option, which will sort of be demonstrated in a later, much later entry. If you know where I'm going with that, you know, and if you don't know, run. bayend.og. Another little Easter egg. This sound file normally plays during the game's introduction when the voiceover says the quality part of Beyond Quality. It's typically inaudible during this part. However, if you grab the window and drag it around until the opening finishes, you can hear the sound isolated. It's pretty much just an oink sound. I'll just play it right here. Non-Euclidean tile size. As probably anyone has noticed this after playing for even a little bit, what the size of one tile in Dwarf Fortress is incredibly unclear. Unclear is actually kind of selling it short. What constitutes as filling a tile can range from anything from a single strawberry to several entire dwarves to 400,000 marble blocks. The only real, quote-unquote, real explanation for this is that tiles in Dwarf Fortress are non-Euclidean, meaning that their dimensions exist outside of our understanding of three-dimensional space. This is probably why we haven't seen any dwarven mathematicians. Anyone trying to understand how space works around them is probably subject to just losing their mind. Magical item attribute. The magical item attribute is an unused attribute most likely for a future update involving the procedurally generated magic system Tarn has been teasing for some time. There's also a similar tag that can be applied to creatures that has no effect on gameplay in any way, but also doesn't crash or confuse the game in any way either. I'm not sure if this refers to something specific. I only found information about the attribute existing and not any in-game examples or specific functions. Night trolls convert and forcibly mate with their captives. Night trolls are another procedurally generated night creature, I presume that also attack you at night, found in adventure mode that have no formal relationship to the regular trolls. This entry refers to their method of reproduction, which I must stress is not theorized. This is exactly how this works in-game, where they kidnap any member of a non-goblin civilization, transform them into another night troll of the opposite gender, and then proceed to procreate with them. The gender of the kidnappee does not matter. They will change upon transformation to the appropriate one. It is not explained why night trolls must do this, and why they simply cannot mate with already existing night trolls, nor why they even need to procreate when they can seemingly just transform most intelligent races into more of themselves, but that's neither here nor there. Post-World Gen stagnation. This refers to the phenomenon of world history just kind of plateauing after initial world generation. Commonly, the main changes to world history seem to be from player interaction in Fortress or Adventure mode, and maybe the odd event occurring, but there's very little happening compared to the dramatic, world-changing events that are described in the legends immediately after creating the world. This partially can be explained by the significant slowdown in the passage of time once player intervention begins in the world, as world generation will be pumping out decades within minutes, but it does seem like there is some mechanic that slows down calculations for distant or unrelated civilizations. I didn't find any specific explanations for this one, unfortunately, so if you know more about this, please leave it in a comment. Goblin Snatchers rescue children from the player. This is another kind of funny theory, that the goblin snatchers that invade your fortress to steal your dwarven children are doing it for the benefit of the children, specifically because of the horrors you, the player, are capable of. Now, I'm sure most of us treat the children with the usual irreverence that is expected, but with things such as the dwarven daycare, not to be confused with the regular daycare, maybe the goblins don't have such a bad idea. Kobold true appearance. Kobolds in fantasy media vary wildly in their appearance, and Dwarf Fortress is no exception. This entry probably refers to what kobolds are intended to actually look like. Unlike the scaly reptilian descendants of dragons in other fantasy media, or even the cute, moe-fied rat folk the fandom seems to depict them as, the actual appearance of kobolds can be described as egg-laying chihuahua people, which is probably like my favorite thing that I've ever heard. Flat chains and Banach spaces. This is referring to the dissertation Tarn Adams wrote for his PhD in advanced mathematics. I don't know anything about anything, so I'm just gonna read Tarn's own description of the paper, and if you get anything out of this, you're far ahead of me. So in general, if you've got my paper, kind of, overall, we're considering what are called minimal surfaces. So if you take, given a wire, you've got a minimal surface, etc, etc. So what are the parameters that you need? It's not the straight line distance between 2 points anymore, but kind of like how far, if you change the distance function on that. So maybe you've heard of the taxi cab distance in New York City, like how many blocks up, how many blocks over, that kind of thing. But in any case, I've rambled a bit, but I just generally proved that these minimal surfaces exist in more complicated spaces, and there's been a lot of subsequent work and work that was going on at the same time in more general spaces, all kinds of different stuff. Yeah, if anyone has like a simpler explanation on that, I would love to hear it, because that does sound interesting, but I can't even begin to understand what that means. World Gen famines. Certain parameters changed during World Gen can cause famines to occur to certain civilizations. Specifically, turning off cavern layers can cause famines specifically affecting dwarves, although it also affects elves to an extent. Occasionally, famines can also just occur naturally if biomes generate in a weird way that leaves civilizations without proper access to food sources. Also, kobolds are just always subject to experiencing famines. That's just kind of how the world works. Blank slate NPCs. All intelligent creatures in Dwarf Fortress have a soul. This is a literal, observable file that is generated in the game for anything with thought that contains information about its likes, dislikes, relations, memories, and concepts like that. This gets tricky once something dies. Its soul is usually erased entirely, meaning that if you were to raise a sapient creature back from the dead through necromancy, whatever you brought back will contain none of the information it had before it died, making it a perfect blank slate. In doing further research for this, I also did find that it depends on how the creature comes back, because it does appear that sometimes you can deliberately raise an intelligent creature back up that will still, I don't know if it still has its old soul or if it generates a brand new soul, which would then also still be a perfect blank slate, but you can also just raise the dead completely devoid of intelligence. So I'm not sure specifically what this one is referring to. You are Armok. This one is pretty simple. I say as I'm looking at my script, and it's probably the largest entry I've written. This largely seems to be Tarn's intention in the description of Armok. He is described as a god who enjoys watching conflict for his amusement and will reforge the world to be more interesting at a whim. As the player, your presence is never directly acknowledged. You just give your dwarves tasks to perform somehow and hope to you that they can make it through and provide you with a little entertainment. The actual in-game explanation for Armok supports this theory very well, and I'm just going to read it for you here. Armok, the god of blood, is just about the only constant in these chaotic random universes. A general sense of conflict keeps Armok appeased. When the universe becomes too boring, it is set on the anvil of creation to be reforged. The destruction of the world by Armok will arise inevitably in most game worlds. As civilizations spread and the frontier closes, the world will start to look homogeneous. Armok, looking upon this decadence in disgust, will reform the world. Basically, when the universe has become too boring, it will be changed. But who or what is Armok? Armok is the god of blood, the supreme god. He gives his name to the game. His powers are literally endless. He creates and destroys whole universes just for pleasure and fun. He enjoys watching death, destruction, and of course, blood run on his universe. In a universe, he can have billions of worshippers, while in another his existence might be unknown. But he exists. This cannot be denied, and allows to play almost any type of universe, from a standard fantasy type world to a primitive Stone Age world, and why not a future world with star travel? In fact, when Armok creates a universe, he likes putting more than one planet in it. Remember, Armok can control and destroy all other creatures, including the other lesser gods. But he usually enjoys watching civilizations grow, because he hopes that one day these civilizations will fight each other, and thus generate conflict and slaughter. There is also this post on the Dwarf Fortress subreddit by a user Monkey Fetus that I would also like to read that I really enjoy. A lot of people seem to think that Armok is a deity worshipped by the dwarves. They're wrong. Each civilization of dwarves have their own pantheon of gods they worship. Armok isn't a god they pray to. Armok is the god they serve. Armok is the one true god of Dwarf Fortress, the one who created the world, and the one who compels them to build their greatest monuments, the one whose whims lead to wandering adventurers to raise armies of the dead and slaughter entire towns of men, women, and children, the one whose lust for the rarest of metals causes them to unleash untold suffering onto the world. The dwarves are not worshippers of Armok, no, they are slaves to Armok, god of blood. They are slaves to you. Dwarves replaced by worm people living in a world intestine and routinely being snatched by spirits to be drowned in a lake of bile. This specifically refers to a comment by Toady1 when asked about plans regarding options to make World Gen more or less cruel, and the assumption that the existing World Gen was already at the maximum of cruelty. I'll just read off the exchange here, it's pretty cut and dry. How would world demographics population dynamics work in a setting where there is no death at all of intelligent races? Also, the dev page said there would be a spectrum from no death or violence to regular settings to bleak and horrifying. But as you described it in your answer to my previous question, it sounds like you consider the regular settings already to be the bleak and horrifying end of the spectrum. Is that indeed the case, or did you just not go into the other side of things? If it's the latter, could you elaborate on what would be different in that side of the spectrum relative to the regular settings as we know them now? Perhaps just quantitatively more violence by changing some numbers around? Or would it be a qualitative difference somehow? Even as it stands, population hits a cap pretty quickly due to the memory/speed constraints. No, I don't consider the current settings to be the bleak and horrifying setting. The current settings are in the middle. The worlds can be much more bleak and horrifying. Nothing is set in stone at this point, but we'd like to start by biasing the myth generator towards terrible starting points, events, and outcomes, with a hard ceiling on how pleasant it can be. This can be directed towards pervasive body horror and/or oppressive hopelessness. At the current settings, even though parts of the world are scary, and there are conflicts and bad critters, you can still build something lasting and positive and make the world a better place. This does doesn't need to be true for the game to work, as long as legends can still carry through between plays and stories arise, though at the extreme settings, in either direction, it would probably take a certain frame of mind to enjoy it for long. I don't think it'll be easy to pull off without being campy or unfair, but failure in that regard hasn't stopped us so far. If we start out with a typical result being dwarves replaced by worm people living in a world intestine and routinely being snatched by spirits to be drowned in a lake of bile, or something like that, it's fine, and we can refine our sense of horror and playability from there. Cautionsaurus. This is the official name for the little guy that represents Bay 12 Games on a bunch of their web pages. There really isn't much more information than that. It's just a funny little character.
Well, that's a funny little character. I like that. Have you seen this little guy?
Which guy?
Holy shit.
What?
Have you seen this little character? Look at that. No.
Shut the fuck up!
This is literally the shortest entry. The Goblin Fortress mod. The Goblin Fortress mod is an extremely comprehensive mod that allows you to embark as a goblin tribe without adding any additional files to the vanilla Dwarf Fortress experience. The goblins play extremely differently, with them being entirely carnivorous and valuing tools and furniture made out of bone more than anything else. They even have the ability to make meat alcohol, which is an absolute horrific concept. If that is real, please don't tell me about that. By the way, I don't want to know. They also have a different noble structure with shamans, war chiefs, tribal chieftains, and a goblin king that reports directly to the demonic entity they observe. There are many other changes to them, like the livestock and pets they have access to, the diseases they get, and the materials which they can use on common objects. If this interests you, the mod is definitely worth taking a look at, and I'll slap a link in the description. Looking for home? This is an Easter egg found in Dwarf Fortress version 23A, before the game had Z levels like I mentioned in Boat Murdered. It's really basic, so I'm just going to read the wiki entry verbatim. If you scroll the map to the left for long enough, the message, "Looking for home? Quite a long way yet," will appear in the center of the screen. Similarly, scrolling to the right will eventually display the message, "As you journey to the center of the world, feel free to read the death announcements of those dwarves that suffer your neglect." Raw duplication. Raw duplication refers to a glitch caused by either irresponsible modding or intentionally to achieve strange effects wherein raw files in the game, the files that describe anything from creatures to objects to materials, are duplicated, leading to the game getting really confused as to what's supposed to be where, and starts assigning the wrong attributes and locations to things. The wiki page for this phenomenon is an extremely interesting read, but some of the highlights include creatures being found in the wrong location with the wrong behaviors, trees being entirely absent, grass being composed of things that definitely aren't grass, evil weather being mined like stone and similarly used as construction material, and much, much more. Fell Site. Another quick one. Formally, Fell Site is the third month of the Dwarven calendar, and like all other months of the Dwarven calendar, is based on a type of stone. Specifically, it is a fine-grained volcanic rock similar to dacite, or dacite? I should have probably looked that one up. Oh well, someone will correct me. Dacite, or dacite, which in the 2010 update entirely replaced Fell Site, and has since not appeared in the game outside of just the calendar. Scamp's attempts on Toadie's life. Scamps was Tarn and Zach's pet cat for 13 years, who unfortunately passed away on June 15th, 2022 of lymphoma. During his life, Scamps was known for being the smallest mega beast, and his behavior was known as adopts his victim while he is a kitten. When Scamps hits adulthood, he will slash his victim's throat and drink its blood, which will turn Scamps back into a kitten. Similar to a fountain of youth, beware its dangerous eyes. Scamps was known for his regular attempts at fulfilling his destiny, attacking Tarn in the pursuit for eternal youth. Others cling to life as you are able. An absolutely ancient quote from Tarn Adams back in 2004 when originally discussing the release of the Dwarf game, as it was known at the time. It was a reply to user Aquilon saying, "This game looks great. It's probably the first ever ASCII game to get FMV previews," with Tarn's response being, "Yeah, it almost looks done. Alas, those who are in your teens, hold on until your 20s. Those in your 20s, your 30s. Others, cling to life as you are able." It should be pretty fun though. You know, I didn't actually understand the significance of why this was in the iceberg until just reading it and re-listening to the recording now. He's specifically referring to how long this is going to take to finish development. If you're in your teens, wait till your 20s, maybe it'll be done. If you're in your 20s, maybe your 30s. If you're past that, just stay alive. It'll be done someday. Mutant Miner. Mutant Miner is an unreleased game made by Tarn Adams that he worked on in the very early 2000s. Not much of it is known about it aside from the fact that it was heavily inspired by Miner VGA, a top-down strategy game for MS-DOS. This probably could actually end up in a few lost media lists because we know about it, but we have never seen anything about it. And this would be really interesting to, like, even just historically, you know, get your hands on. Also, once again, like, just realizing that this probably has ties to Dwarf Fortress. Like, it's about mining. Dwarf Fortress is largely about mining designing. There is correlation there. So maybe if we ever did see what this was, there might be some noticeable overlap between the two. Adventure or mind control. I've referenced an upcoming theory about adventure mode a couple times earlier, and this is the one. The idea behind this one is that the character you control in adventure mode, it's basically being piloted by you, but underneath is still a fully functional sapient being. This also lines up with the you are Armok theory, that you, as a god, have decided to take control over a single being just for fun. It also explains why you still have consciousness after you die. You're still you, as in like Armok, you, the player, seeing the world from the cold, lifeless eyes of your former host until you choose to exit. Consolidated development. This is a page on the Bay 12 Games website that offers somewhat of a roadmap to the development of Dwarf Fortress. These are listed with arcs, a theme in which multiple features may be centered around, the description of the arc/features, and which goals and features need to be completed first as a requirement. These aren't really organized by any form of urgency, only in significance of short-term / close to completion arcs, core updates, and extremely long-term goals. This page has been around for an extremely long time, and not all of the entries listed even apply to the game anymore, but it's an extremely interesting read on what can be and what could have been. Multiple souls. In a previous entry, we discussed the concept of souls in Dwarf Fortress, the literal files given to every creature that stores their entire person. Because of this, it's possible for creatures to have multiple souls inside of them, although this is typically not a natural occurrence. In the Masterwork mod, any creature with 2 heads will also have 2 distinct souls within them, as well as just much more robust features involving like soul harvesting and using souls for ritual. I'm assuming it's fairly easy to give a creature multiple souls through modding, although I wasn't able to find any information on what that actually does. So if anyone's like tried that before or just knows what's up, leave it in the comments because it would be super interesting to know. Forgotten Beast True Origins. This entry is likely a reference to a Reddit post from about 10 years ago that is also further referenced on the Dwarf Fortress wiki page on Forgotten Beasts, replying to the question, what makes Forgotten Beasts forgotten? The reply reads as followed. In the time before time, when Armok himself was not part of the great machine beast framework, the idea itself of alldom, dwarfdom, elfdom, tools and valueless remained in the greater unknowable realm of hard possibility called hard disk space. All was concept data idiosyncratic. Thence came the being of life, flesh, machine, and the machine beast framework, and thence Armok was, is, and ever will be. Armok's hands moved and invoked the commands of the plane / realm, and raised the possibility of all worlds that can be, of the blessed who can know Armok. Thence Armok exhaled his vaporous breath and said, create new world, and the machine beast framework began his dire task. Legions of empires, battalions of timelines, and civilizations of worlds were born, lost, and discarded, as the will of Armok angered in wait. Finally, world acceptance was allowed, yet the flesh machine beast framework has failed Armok, for Armok knows of the world behind the worlds, of the intent of his dimension, of the destination of the unmoving stone. He knows that the beasts of the null result unparsable, those ideas from a time before the rules exist not. The pen factor of Armok, the toady one, foresaw this failure. He knew that the Armok transcended the very power of the universe vessel, the machine beast framework, and to please our god, to let him revel in the glory that is the knowing of himself, he created, nay, forced the existence of the beasts. I am not insane, really. Too long didn't read, forgotten beasts are forced into existence. They are the cast-outs from the time before times, and exist to suffer, force suffering, and please Armok. They are forgotten because none of the manifold vessels and registers were initialized to hold their idea eggs, to allow them to be procedurally generated in the prehistory of the world. So basically, from what I can understand, forgotten beasts are the remnants from all of the failed world generations that occurred as you're making your world, but that due to some either form of immense compassion or immense cruelty, were allowed to be given form in the universe that was actually created. Death timer. This is likely referring to how the game handles aging. On the first day of every year, the game checks each creature if their time is approaching and calculates accordingly, often leading to creatures with shorter lifespans all passing away at the same time on the 1st of Granite every year. Creatures' expiration dates are all hard-coded into their souls, so even save scumming won't squeeze any extra time out of them, leading to your dwarves functionally being on a set timer from the moment of their birth, assuming that they're fortunate enough to meet their end via old age, which is just it's not very common. Arena mode alternate dimension. Arena mode is an often forgotten feature of Dwarf Fortress. I mean, at least it is for me. I forgot about it until doing this iceberg. That allows you to generate objects, creatures, and effects to simulate interactions similar to a creative mode in other sandbox games. This refers specifically to a glitch that you can perform when taking control of a creature in this mode. As the creature, you need to find a way to acquire a scroll, typically through DF hack or modding an interaction to produce one, as well as giving the creature you're controlling the ability to read. Once these conditions are met, writing anything on the scroll will teleport your character to a completely different dimension. This place is a flat plain of grass and pawns with the same size and restrictions as the arena location. The grass found here is the unused generic grass type of grass, and otherwise the ground is composed of clay and marble. It is unknown why this occurs at all, but it's absolutely fascinating. Male-only tentacle demons. I really shouldn't have to explain this one too much. The main takeaway is that while other lesser demons are exclusively genderless, the corrupting tentacle demons exclusively spawn as males. Anyone who understands what this possibly could be a reference to has already made that connection solely based on the title, and anyone who doesn't is either too young to be watching this video or too pure of heart to also be watching this video. Thankfully, tentacle demons were removed in version 0.31, and outside of these older versions, we'll never have to think about them again. Material entries for unsavory substances in the game files. This entry is only kind of true, as materials under those names don't exactly appear in the game files. However, there are two materials in the game that allude very heavily to these substances. The first is filth. Filth doesn't appear much in game, occasionally being a material forgotten beasts can be composed of along with grime, but that's about it. Filth comes in two varieties, brown filth and yellow filth, obviously being references to the first two substances on this entry. Brown filth is treated as a solid, while yellow filth is a liquid, and both will decompose after some time being left out in the open, albeit at different rates. The third substance referred to can be found as something known as unknown substance. Unknown substance was a light gray liquid with similar properties to water and generally no interactions. This material was removed from the game quite a while ago, but at the time was found inside glowing pits housing tentacle demons along with both varieties of filth. Just another reason why we're thankful those guys are just fucking gone. Tarn turned down a position at Mojang. I didn't find any direct references to this occurring, however I do have one lead that this entry may be extrapolating from. Around 2013, the Adams brothers were approached by a publisher they choose not to name, who offered them a 6-figure deal for the rights to the Dwarf Fortress name. Tarn turned it down in order to preserve total control over his project. As while the offer was substantially lucrative, there were myriad ways why this could result in disaster for the game itself. In the interview on the topic, Tarn mentions Minecraft specifically when musing on why the publisher went after them and not something with more relevant brand presence, possibly leading to people thinking this was Mojang themselves making the offer. This is another one that if anyone knows anything more about, because this doesn't feel like the correct answer, but if you do know something, leave it in the comments. Tarn suffers from a strange mood. If you are this far into an Iceberg video about Dwarf Fortress, you should probably already know what a strange mood is, but just in case you don't, it's a random event that can occur to dwarves inside your fortress. There are multiple different flavors of strange mood, but they all sort of function in the same way. A dwarf will suddenly become obsessive over creating something, withdraws from society, and takes over a workshop. The dwarf demands certain materials, the dwarf then goes and acquires those materials through any means necessary if able, and will finally use them to craft some sort of amazing priceless artifact, or go insane in the process. Tarn Adams is a man who withdrew from society, quit his position as a mathematician, took over a workshop, his computer, and used various materials, ASCII art, to create an absolute masterpiece that will be treasured for generations. He also might have gone insane. Enemies intentionally cause FPS death to discourage the player. In a game with smart enough AI, you would think that eventually the enemies would learn to start targeting the player directly in order to win, and I think that's what the theory is getting at. For starters, FPS death is a concept in Dwarf Fortress where for one reason or another, or many cascading reasons, your fortress is no longer able to function, but not from death or famine or fun, but from the sheer weight of every interaction occurring at once, bringing the game speed to a snail's pace. Once FPS death occurs, that's pretty much the end of the fortress, unless you can find some specific cause of it, and even then it would be faster to just embark anew rather than slog through the single-digit frames per second to rectify it. The idea here is that enemies will knowingly perform actions that tank your frame rate in order to cause you to abandon the fortress and succumb to the siege, especially in situations where you have walled your dwarves off to absolute safety. Sieges may stack upon sieges, filling the spaces outside your walls with the maximum number of invading creatures, each eating up a chunk of your single processor core. A truly devious strategy. No good. ... Okay, you guys can forgive me for not knowing what the fuck this one is, right? This is literally unsearchable. If anyone has any idea what this one is, please leave a comment, because this has been driving me crazy since I first skimmed through the iceberg. I asked 2 of my friends who are involved in the Dwarf Fortress community. One just laughed really hard at my suffering, and the other one thinks it has something to do with an early implementation of prayer in adventure mode, in which this was the response to praying towards your deity. My personal guess was that this is related to the update that first added dialogue during combat in adventure mode, specifically when it was just non-stop, edgy, nothing personnel kid type one-liners after nearly every interaction. But this is at most bare speculation. I have no clue. Do you know what you get when you Google three ellipses? You get nothing. That's not a searchable term. No killing for the source. This one refers partially to the nature of Dwarf Fortress's source code and partially to the nature of Tarn Adams' will when he passes away. As many of you may know, Dwarf Fortress is a closed source game, meaning that only Tarn, Zach, and select associates have access to the raw code that makes up the game itself. This is due to multiple reasons, with the foremost being that Tarn doesn't want multiple forked projects of Dwarf Fortress to spring up, splitting the, at the time the statement, quite small user base, and taking away the already meager support he was being given to create it. In the event that Tarn should pass, it is stated in his will who should inherit the source code for Dwarf Fortress, likely with multiple clauses, such as if Zach has also passed away, for example. There's one specific stipulation involving the event that Tarn is offed as an attempt to get a hold of the source code, and Tarn has made multiple jokes over the years about fearing for his life over assassination attempts. The game is Armok. This one is just sort of circular logic. Unlike the theory that you are Armok, this one proposes that the game itself is Armok, and you are simply using Armok's powers as an outside force. Since the game is the one capable of reforging universes at a whim, and intentionally generates all conflict and bloodshed, you could be led to think that the game itself is finding amusement in the things that it creates. I mean, why else would it generate worlds so innately hostile and cruel? All mods are canon. Okay, and here we're at the final stretch, tier 6. Whoa, let's wrap this guy up. Every mod, from Masterwork mod that adds more useful materials and interactions, to The Long Night that totally converts the game into a sci-fi setting, to Rise of the Mushroom Kingdom that lets you play in the world of Super Mario Bros., every single one of these is canon to Dwarf Fortress. The more interesting question here is, what does it mean to be canon to Dwarf Fortress? Like, every world you generate is its own distinct universe, unaffected by anything that happens in any other world. Why couldn't some worlds have odd creatures or material types, or be set in entirely different timelines where dwarves are given spacefaring technology? It's not as if the vanilla worlds of Dwarf Fortress are cohesive whatsoever with their histories or events. One could absolutely go wild with this line of thought. Also, I'm just realizing now, in the description in-game of Armok, literally mentions this. When he mentions that you can make a world with Stone Age technology, fantasy technology, or even set in the far distant sci-fi future, this is what he's talking about. It's real. It's in the game. That's crazy. It's blowing my mind. Arsenal Dwarf. The Arsenal Dwarf was a former administrative noble that existed in version 0.31 and was swiftly removed afterwards. The position's whole purpose is to personally hand out new equipment to your dwarves whenever you make a change to the loadouts of your militia squads. Before the Arsenal Dwarf joins your fortress, your militia dwarves will just equip items themselves when needed, as they do in the current version of the game. However, once this guy shows up, you'll have to wait for him to personally give each and every item to each and every dwarf, and just pray to Armok that he isn't busy eating or something if you're trying to hastily arm a squad during a siege. Removed for very good reason, the Arsenal Dwarf was probably the most useless noble in the game. DF talks after number 22 are AI generated. So as a preface, I'm getting tired. Preface. As a preface, DF Talk is a podcast started in 2009 featuring Captain Tastic, Sunseeker, and Toady One himself discussing all things Dwarf Fortress, as well as occasionally hosting Zach and some other guests. This entry concerns the immense gap between DF Talk 22 and DF Talk 23. The former was published in 2013, while the latter published in 2020, and continuing a semi-regular release schedule until number 28 on February 4th, 2021. I can't really find any specific mention of this, just some concerns regarding the audio quality of episode 23. I'm guessing it's just a theory that after such a long absence, Toady programmed some very advanced AI to mimic the exact sound of the three of them and just continue the podcast for a brief time. Bay12games.com/subgames. This is a hidden page on the Bay 12 Games website that is only accessible by knowing the link and doesn't appear to actually be anywhere on their pages. Perhaps for good reason, they were known for making somewhat edgy games back in the early 2000s, as seen with their public release of Liberal Crime Squad. However, the games on this page seem to be even edgier. The page is quite small, so I'll just go ahead and read its contents here. Welcome to the Bay 12 sub-games area. The games here are not about submarines. Oh no, these games have been deemed unfit for human consumption by the very people that wrote them. Sub-games, degeneracy culled from the mind of the programmer doing brief lapses of good taste and common sense. Do not play them. I am serious. Requires Windows 98 or higher. Games. No more stumpy wumples. 1.18 megabytes, posted November 2005. Violence, potentially disturbing themes, as well as bad language. I'm voting for myself. 1.65 megabytes, posted July 2005. All characters are 18 plus. Animal death and bad language. Fuck You, version 1.02. About 500 kilobytes, updated July 2004, posted March 2004. Bad language, breasts, and the corruption of toddlers. Oh, dude, what? Environmental extremism, posted March 2003. Violence and irresponsible content, as well as bad art. Thank you. That's a warning I needed. Cross Stompers, posted March 2003. Religious content. Do not play. No redeeming features. Requires DirectX. 3x3 staircases based on real architecture. Another one I'm not finding any specific information on. The closest thing I can see is player made diagrams of how the up-down staircase works, resembling real-life U-shaped stair designs, but that's not really relating specifically to the 3x3 design. Another thought is that players seem to be prone to just building their staircases as 3x3s without any extraneous reasoning or justification, and that we may just find that to be more aesthetically pleasing, symmetrical, and just easier to design hallways and rooms more comfortably around. Similarly to most architecture in real life, it's the combination of function and pleasure that drives it. The UI is actually good. This isn't a joke though. I don't know what anyone else could possibly want out of a user interface. Everything is there. It's all extremely intuitive. You want to build? You hit B for build. You want to look around? You hit K for look. You want to construct stairs? Well, you just gotta hit B, because obviously you're gonna build something. And then you're gonna want to hit Shift C for construction, because we all know construction always begins with a capital letter. Then you press the X button for up and down stairs, because obviously, if you want your stairs to work both ways, we all know the combination of up and down is the X. And then you might have working stairs if you know what you're doing. The design is very human. And to be fair, you have to have a very high IQ to understand the Dwarf Fortress UI. Anyway, the Steam release just dropped, and it solves a bunch of these issues. Although I've been playing like this for so long, I'm personally afraid to make the switch, and I'm recording this after the Steam version came out, and I've been playing it, and it is very different and very jarring. Dwarf Therapist Hidden Message. I couldn't find anything on this one either. I didn't find a single thing about any hidden message or secret Easter egg within Dwarf Therapist. I don't even have a funny bit or weird speculation like the other ones. I just don't know. Again, if you know, leave a comment. I actually thought this one was going to be fairly easy, but I don't know. I just really hope the answer wasn't, oh, put a space between the E and the R in Therapist, because that's not an Easter egg. That's just like a joke we would make when we were 10. DF hack multi-threading. Multi-threading is something that comes up a ton in discussions about Dwarf Fortress's performance, usually spurred on by comments from people who think they know what they're talking about, something along the lines of, why doesn't Toady just add multi-threading? It shouldn't be that hard. The game is so simple. For reference, the current iteration of Dwarf Fortress is only capable of using a single core of your computer's CPU, due to the game being created when single core processing was what was the norm. In order to implement multi-threading, the game would have to be rewritten from the ground up, with support for multiple simultaneous calculations. This unfortunately has to be explained to people on the daily who repeatedly ask, well, why doesn't he just do it? Similarly, this topic comes up with discussions on features and plugins for DF Hack, the popular do-it-all toolkit for Dwarf Fortress, and an almost identical response, no, DF Hack cannot just add multi-threading to Dwarf Fortress. The game still relies on calculations being made subsequently instead of simultaneously, and not a single line of code in the game is built to do that. And again, just another clarification to add on here, we don't have the source code to Dwarf Fortress. DF Hack is built entirely by reverse engineering what Dwarf Fortress does. So, even if we had the source code, you would still just need to make an entirely new game that does that. It's not simple. Tantrum spirals are accurate to human psychology. Once again, no concrete information about this, but it's self-evident enough to be explained. Tantrum spirals are when a single bad event in a fortress causes one or more dwarves to just snap and go completely insane, leading to actions causing other dwarves to snap, cascading all the way down until the fortress is no more. This entry proposes that tantrum spirals seen in-game mirror exactly how humans in the real world would react to similar situations. And quite frankly, there are so many historical examples of things like this happening in the real world that even in modern times, I wouldn't say I totally disagree with this. Ashen-Toothed Demon of Lies. Okay, so I wasn't sure if these next two entries were actually one entry, and I was just finding no information, but I've come to the conclusion that they're two separate things, and I'll treat them as such. If you're the creator of this iceberg, and this was not the case, please let me know. And also tell me what the fuck this entry was supposed to mean. Anyway, Ashen-Toothed Demon of Lies seems to refer to a specific screenshot posted to Reddit in 2015 of an adventurer investigating a plot to assassinate a king. The screenshot has since become a very minor community meme, appearing every so often. I'll just go ahead and read it. What rumors have you heard? I have heard plans to assassinate the king. Tell me more. Sigurd, king consort, reveals herself as Kumkra, the Ashen-Toothed Demon of Lies. As Kumkra, the Ashen-Toothed Demon of Lies, grabs Riggoth, Dwarf King, by the head. As Kumkra, the Ashen-Toothed Demon of Lies, grabs Riggoth, Dwarf King, by the head, pulping it. They say a demon plots for the king's death. I must leave. DF 2014 scrapped feature. This could be referring to two things, either features that were originally planned to be introduced in DF 2014 but were never made, or features that already existed in-game but were removed in DF 2014. I'll talk about the latter here because, as for the former, we just really don't have any information about features that were cut mid-development. I've already talked about a few things removed from Dwarf Fortress, such as the Arsenal Dwarf, Fellsight, Tentacle Demons, and the Economy. However, none of these were removed specifically in DF 2014. Truthfully, I can't find a comprehensive list of features removed in this specific version, and the only lists of generally removed content I found are forum threads of people just rattling off their favorite former features. If you know of any specific features lost to DF 2014, let me know in the comments. As I've said so many times in this iceberg, just like, if you have anything to say, any correction or anything, just drop them down there. I'm gonna read all of them because there was a few things that I was just completely lost about, and I would love to have answers. Okay, so I'm just editing here, and I've sort of been realizing that I do think those two were supposed to be one entry, although I couldn't find anything about them at all. So I'm gonna leave this in, but I feel like that entry was supposed to be about a specific feature that was part of DF 2014 in regards to Ashen-Toothed Demon of Lies, maybe some feature or ability that it had that was just not meant for human eyes, I think. But yeah, I didn't find anything about that, with all keywords looking for even just separately Ashen-Toothed Demon of Lies or scrapped features in DF 2014. So yeah, like with everything else here, if you know what this is, then drop it down in the comments and I'll, pin it or something like that. Obok Meat God. Okay, last one, and we're ending on a real stinker here. I wasn't looking forward to doing this one. Despite being at the bottom of the iceberg, most longtime Dwarf Fortress enjoyers probably know the story of Obok Meat God. Perhaps not beat for beat or even having read the entire thing, but are aware of its existence and what had occurred. I really want to be careful talking about this one because it goes places where anyone truly shouldn't. I don't even mean like it's gonna make YouTube mad at me. I mean like it makes me feel ill, and morally I just don't want to expose people to it. There's a good reason people who even just invoke the name of this tale get banned from the forums and the subreddit. The original story seems pretty much impossible to find nowadays, which is probably for the best. Specifically, there was a Pastebin re-hosting of it that I'm assuming is completely lost now because Pastebin seemingly got nuked, I think. I'm not quite on the up and up with that. And also explanations are also fairly scarce of the story. To explain from what I can remember personally and from what I can find in research, and also just in the broadest strokes because I don't want to get into many details. Someone originally posted a story about their adventurer on the Bay 12 forums, and the adventurer's name was Obok Meat God. He was super tough and badass, and the tales of his feats were just becoming very interesting with a lot of readers. The story of Obok just started taking a turn for the horrific as the creator just had him perform just increasingly deranged acts until it all culminated at the end with him kidnapping a child and editing the game files to allow him to perform some unspeakable acts. Immediately after that, the thread was completely scrubbed off of the forums, and they just straight up banned any discussion about it. Looking for information about Obok Meat God yields only really half the results being related to Dwarf Fortress, while the other half refers to the creator of some truly rancid shock content going by the same cursed name. This is probably one of the things that's better off being lost to time, although the general information could serve as a warning to the community. A warning to what? I'm not quite sure, and I don't think I'm qualified at all to just make something up, but I feel like there's a lesson here in some way. Oh boy, what a way to end that one. Oh god, that sucks. Otherwise, though, we're done. Aside from that ending, I had a lot of fun making this. Dwarf Fortress has been one of my favorite games since like 2011, 2012, or something like that. I'm recording the outro first, so if I say anything that I already said in the intro, then just ignore that. My outros are usually all just off-script rambling of me, just very tired. I think I've been recording for like 4 hours now, because this was supposed to just be a fun little interim project between tiers 1 and 2 of the MUGEN Iceberg, and this just immediately ballooned out. It's crazy. I'm dizzy. My voice is sore. But otherwise, I hope you enjoyed watching this. If you're here till the end, thank you very much. Consider subscribing, because I'm doing these, and I'm doing more, and they will be interesting. If I get enough recommendations for other topics, I might do another Dwarf Fortress one, because I know there's a ton of weird Dwarf Fortress information out there that you could probably make several other icebergs. It doesn't even have to be an iceberg, it could just be a descending list of weird topics. That'd be super fun. I definitely wouldn't mind doing another one of these. I gotta go to bed right away. If you watched my MUGEN Iceberg, I mentioned microphone issues, so I'm back on the quadcast now. So if you're from there and you see this, let me know how it sounds, because I don't have an ear for audio. I'm defective or something. Oh god, I'm passing out here. But thank you truly for watching. I sure hope to see you in the next one, which is definitely going to be the tier 2 of the MUGEN Iceberg. After that, little spoilers if you're here early. I want to do a 2022 Game of the Year list. I know I am an absolute nobody, and not a single person is gonna give an shit for my opinion, but I want to do it because it sounds fun, and I have some games I want to talk about. I didn't play almost any AAA games, and the list is mostly going to be bullshit, but I want to talk about some of them, so that's what we're doing. Anyway, I'm gonna go to bed. I'm gonna straight up dead ass pass out. So see y'all in the next one. Take care and goodbye.